Welcome to the Ignite the Day podcast hosted by Rhema UK and Ireland. Igniting your day with revelation, inspiration, and encouragement, helping you to live the life that God has called you to.
Hello and welcome to Ignite the Day podcast. Today I have a very special guest with me. I have Pastor Ben Conway from Tree of Life Church. I was going to say London, but really it's all over the UK. And we're going to ask Ben to talk a little bit about that shortly. But Ben and his wife Amanda have been pioneering a new network of churches across the UK for what, Ben, 11, 12 years, something like that?
14 years now.
It's 14 now. Wow.
Yeah.
It goes quickly, doesn't it? You can't keep up. But, so I'm really excited to have Ben on the show today and to be able to share some of his wisdom, insight and experience with all of you, our audience. So we're going to get right into the conversation. And first of all, Ben, thank you for joining us.
That's a pleasure.
And I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself. There's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that probably won't have heard of you. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your background is, where you've come from? You know, not necessarily the whole salvation story.
Yeah, no problem. I'll give you as potted as I can. I wasn't raised in a Christian family at all. I got saved in the mid-90s as a teenager. Went to university, left university, dropped out of university to go to Bible college. I went to Elam Bible College. At the time, it was in Nantwich in Cheshire. I spent 3 years there, but never really felt I had an affinity with Elam. I'd spent a lot more time reading Word of Faith materials and really getting this passion for teaching God's Word. So when we left there, we kind of wandered in sort of a wilderness for a few years. And then in 2006, God spoke to me very clearly and told me to move my family to Dagenham in London and start a church. We didn't actually get all that done. We had our first service in 2010. It took a while to get to where we needed to be. But we started our church in 2010 in Dagenham. In 2012, really that's the pivot point for everything that's happening in Tree of Life was 2012. On November 1st, 2012, I started fasting and praying. I just had this desire to see the UK change for the better, to leave a legacy. You know, the Bible talks about a good man leaving an inheritance for his children's children. And, you know, it's more than just cash. It's a legacy. It's something that will leave the nation better than we found it. And certain things were happening that really concerned me. And 3 weeks later, I didn't intend to fast for 3 weeks. I just kept going until I got something. 3 weeks later, I walked into my bedroom. I never pray in my bedroom. I pray in my office. I pray in my living room. I very rarely pray in my bedroom. But I literally, the presence of God was so strong, I fell to my knees in my bedroom. And God spoke to me and said, I want you to start planting churches.
Wow.
I want you to plant a church a year for the next 5 years. And then I want you to give you a strategy. I want you to start a summer family conference. I want you to start a leadership conference. And gave me a strategy really in one day, 21st November 2012. And so the next year we started our first church in Guilford. The next year we started in Watford, and it's been sort of going since then.
Wow. I mean, that's quite a bold thing to do. You know, a church a year for 5 years. And I know you're accelerating even further now. But
we were only running 30 people in Dagenham at the time. I mean, 30 people was a good service.
So I mean, that is also, I mean, I love that because,
yeah.
You know, because so many, I mean, I talk to a lot of people about church planting and, you know, I think one of the things that's exciting in the body of Christ at the moment is there's a resurgence, if you like, of church planting, you know, movement that's coming to the fore, I think, around planting churches. And that's really powerful. But I think, a number of the people that I talk to, a number of the movements think that you've got to be big before you plant. You've got to, you know, have 500, or you've got to have, you know, 100 grand in the bank, or, you know, whatever it is, you know, you've got to have a launch team of 30 people. But you planted when you only had a church of 30 people.
Well, we were told 250. We were told at Bible College 250. You couldn't plant unless you had 250. That was the minimum needed, and 350 would be better. And I'm sure it would be. I'm sure it would be much nicer to plant with more resources and more people. So literally, we started Guilford, and we had nobody. There was one couple in our church, and these terms will mean nobody who lives outside of London, but we're in Dagenham. There was a couple coming to our church from Streatham.
Okay.
And they said, look, it's equally as far to get to Guilford as it is to get to Dagenham on a Sunday morning. So we'll come to Guilford. We'll make Guilford our church. So we had one couple. That was it. And so I literally started preaching in Dagenham Sunday morning. I'm still a lay pastor at this time. I'm still working full time. And then I'd drive to Guilford Sunday evening, and we had a venue, and we met in that venue, and we just had Sunday evening meetings in Guilford, and I pastored it. Now, God had in his wisdom, done something quite remarkable in that May of the year we started Guilford, May of 2013, I was at a conference and there was a man got up who shared his healing testimony, Richard Waller, who I think you probably know.
Yeah.
And Richard shared his healing testimony. He could barely walk. His heart was in a very bad place. His heart was going to fail. And God supernaturally healed him. It's a very powerful testimony. So when I heard that, I found Richard and I said, Richard, I've never met him before. I said, would you come and share that at one of my men's breakfasts? We're running these men's breakfasts, testimonial men's breakfasts. And he came and we had a communication problem in that I asked him, he just got up publicly and shared a healing testimony.
Yeah.
So I said, would you come to my men's breakfast and share your testimony? Presuming it meant the same healing testimony we just heard, but he had testimony and shared how he got saved.
Okay.
And he was a male stripper and he was into all sorts of stuff.
Oh, wow.
And God completely delivered him. And it was a very powerful testimony. And it was probably better for the guys to hear that than hear the healing story, to be honest. It was a, very powerful morning. And so at the end I said, look, would you come? We're going to start church in Guilford in a few months. I know you live near there. Would you come and share there? Take 20 minutes and I'll take 20 minutes to teach and then we'll just pray for the sick. And so that's what happened. And we saw some real miracles. We saw a guy with scoliosis instantly healed and could walk normally. We saw a lot happen. And so at the end of that, Richard turned to me. Remember, this is the third or fourth time I've ever met him in my life. And he said, this is my church. I'll be here till the day I die.
Oh, wow.
And he got in his car and drove off. And I thought, well, I wonder if I'll ever see him again. and he didn't leave. And he was a natural gatherer. And he now pastors that church. He actually looks after 6 or 7 of our churches. And so God brought us Richard at just the right moment for that whole thing to start.
Praise God. And was Richard, just out of curiosity, did he live in the Guilford area or did he come into...
He was in Red Hill.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah.
my neck of the woods then.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. It's right next to you. Yeah.
Near us. Okay, cool. So I mean, I think that's fascinating. So, we've both done the Dynamic Church Planting International training around church planting, or at least some of the tracks that they offer there, and they talk very much about a person of peace to believe God for in an area to plant a church, and it sounds a little bit like Richard might have been your person of peace in that sort of context. That
Definitely,
yeah. Oh, God is so good. So let me ask you a question then. What were the challenges of? I'm thinking about how best to phrase this, but what were the challenges for you personally? The leadership challenges, I guess, is where I'm coming from. Around, you're pastoring a church of 30 over in Dagenham. You're planting a church in Guilford that's, an hour and a half or so away?
About an hour and a half drive.
From Dagenham. So it's quite a drive on a Sunday afternoon after you've already poured your heart out in the morning. Yeah. And yes, praise God, you've got Richard and you've got this other couple from Streatham. But what are the leadership dynamics that you're trying to work through as a relatively new pastor, definitely a new church planter, multiplying churches? Tell us a little bit about.
Well, to be honest, at that stage, we were making it up as we went.
Love it.
Right, we were just making it up as we went, and I knew what I wanted to see, and there was a twofold challenge. The first challenge is this: if you're building a family of churches, you don't want to build a franchise. You don't want it to be a clone.
Yeah.
I'm not Richard. Richard's not me. I'm not Lee or Patience, anyone on our pastoral team. We're very different individuals. So you don't want to build a clone, but you want to have a sense that I'm not, if I walk into a Tree of Life church, I wanted it to mean something.
Yeah.
I wanted to I didn't want you to walk in and not know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And trying to balance between those two. The picture God gave me was, I've got 3 sons. You've met probably most of them. Yeah. And if you met my son, you'd say, man, he looks like you.
Yep.
He does look like me, but he also at the same time doesn't look like me.
Yep.
And so this is how God showed it to me. If he was a clone, he would look like me and look like me.
Yeah, yeah.
If he was a stranger, he wouldn't look like me and wouldn't look like me.
Okay.
But because he's a son, he looks like me and doesn't look like me.
Yeah.
And if we're building a family of churches, every Tree of Life has to look like Tree of Life, but also not look like Tree of Life.
Love it.
And again, it's not very specific, but it gave me a clue of what I was trying to capture. And to be honest, I wasn't sure. Go on.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I wasn't sure what it was going to look like. And I've mentioned Richard a couple of times now, but without Richard, I don't think I'd have believed it was possible. He managed to embody that.
Okay. So how did you do that? So Richard embodied it, but how did you get that that not clone.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll tell you how we're doing it now.
Yeah,
Now
okay.
we have 11 churches. We've got another 6 plants on the way. Literally going to leave this interview. Amanda and I are going to drive up to Scotland. We're planting a church in Scotland. We're going to drive down from Scotland to Blackpool. Thursday night, we're going to have our very first meeting in Blackpool, which is very significant for us. And like you said, God suddenly, in the last 6 months, God's suddenly given us a presence up north.
Yeah.
You know, we've got this church in Manchester, which is thriving. My son's pastoring it. Church in Sheffield, which is thriving. And I'll then preach in the Sheffield church on the Friday night. And so now we've got these 3 groups. And that is what's happened up north has been wonderful because they're sharing leaders. They're going to each other's churches. There's a real sense of camaraderie there. But what we have right now, I'm just looking at my board here. We have 8 areas. It's going to be 11 by the time I'm finished.
Okay.
Where I've got a director, and I've used that word to keep it out of pastor, elder, deacon, sort of church language.
Yeah.
A director who is then responsible for the standards across those things.
Okay.
So one of the areas, for example, is children's ministry.
Yeah.
Okay. So my daughter, as of 3 weeks ago, we've just promoted her as director of children's ministry.
Okay.
So she's now going to sit down with a children's leader of every one of the churches, and let's make sure. And what the analogy I've used is of a football pitch. And I don't know how far this podcast goes, but I mean soccer, you know, the one with the foot in the ball. And so you can play any way you want on that pitch. If you feel your best up front, go up front. If you feel your best, hold back, hold back. If you feel your best moving in the word, move in the word. If you're best moving in the spirit, put a bit more spirit into it. But this is the line.
Yeah.
And we're working out those lines. We've just appointed someone director of worship for the whole churches.
Okay.
So you can be free and go here, but you can't go this far.
Yeah, yeah. So
And
you've
we're
got
working
some
out what
clear
those lines
guardrails
are.
around it.
Yeah. So the first one we did that with was what we call assimilation,
Okay.
which is basically what's our process when someone walks in the door for the first time. And what I wanted was if you walk through the door for the first time of Tree of Life, you get almost the same treatment, whichever Tree of Life it is.
Yeah, okay.
So we've got a system in place. You have a welcome, you get a card, you get an email within 24 hours of coming to the church welcoming you. You get a postcard within 72 hours welcoming you. You get another email on Friday, you know, and then you get an offer of one of my books if you turn up on a second Sunday. And that process is now standardized for all the churches because there's one person who covers that and does that for us.
Okay.
So we've got 9 areas at the moment where we have a director in place who then looks after that and keeps people within that playing field. So that's how we're doing it at the moment.
That's fascinating. So you are creating guardrails for each of those 9 areas and giving someone
Yes.
oversight of those guardrails across the network. So
Yes.
if I were to think about that, so you've centralized certain activities and
Yes.
devolved certain responsibility across the local pastors, if that makes
So-
sense.
The pastor is in charge of that church while it's together.
Yeah.
And there's nothing can sort of take away from that at that moment. To me, it's like a captain of a boat on the sea.
Yeah.
You need someone in charge who's there.
Yeah.
They can't be phoning me up on a Sunday morning and going, what should I do? Right? I'll back you up afterwards. I might correct you in private. I'll back you up afterwards. But within the individual components, we're saying these are the standards. This is what we have to keep to. And some of those are because I want that to be the certain ethos of Tree of Life. Some of them are because I believe that's biblically correct. Some of them are because, like take children's ministry. Some of those things we do in all of our children's ministries are because I don't want the Home Office shutting down our churches.
Yeah.
You know, so there's different reasons where those sort of boundaries come from. But yeah.
Excellent. That's really powerful. And I think that'll, that thinking will help anyone that's trying to work out through the same sort of conundrum that you're working through. Yeah. And there's a great template there, I guess, to be emulated by others that are trying to do sort of similar things. Let me ask you how wide do you see this going? So you've got 6 in the works, I think you said, and 11 currently running. How many more?
The vision is for 100 churches in the UK.
100.
And that no one has to drive more than an hour if they want to go to Tree of Life. That's the vision for the UK. But at the same time, I'm now at a stage where I've got a real passion to start planting in Europe, especially Eastern Europe. And we've got some people in our church, and we've got 40 nationalities.
Yeah.
So we've got people in our church from other nationalities like, man, we would love to see this in our country.
Okay.
So I'm going to take a preliminary trip to Ghana next year.
Oh, wow.
And I love Ghana. It's one of my favorite nations in the world. And We're going to go out there and look at the chance to plant a church there. I've got a vision to start a Bible college in Liberia as well.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on at the moment.
It sounds like it. And that's besides, church planting and delivering 100 churches in the UK.
Yeah.
That's a, most people would say that's an incredibly ambitious vision. But I guess it's been done before, hasn't it? I mean, if you don't put that vision out there, no one's ever going to achieve it, are they?
Yeah, and we need to be bold.
Yeah,
and we have this really strange situation in the world right now, where you've got you take Disney, and Disney know what films they're going to release in 2035.
Yeah,
and most pastors don't know what they're going to preach next Sunday.
Yeah,
and it's like the court jester is more planned and more organized and more full of faith than the prophet.
Yeah.
And we're supposed to be building something that challenges society. A good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. So therefore, what we're building should always be generational. And so, if Jesus comes back tomorrow, great. I'm excited. I'll meet him, and that'll be wonderful. But if he doesn't come back for 200 years, what are we building? What legacy are we leaving for the next generation? And I think that's really important. And I also believe that every generation needs a first generational church planting movement.
Talk to me a bit more about that. What do you mean by that?
Okay. I mean that it is new churches.
Okay.
So it's wonderful that we've got these established denominations. All of them at one stage were first generational.
Yeah.
They only had that was the pioneers were that generation.
Yeah.
And what happens is if someone starts a new church in a town, it doesn't actually hinder the other church in the town. Every study shows it benefits the other churches in the town. There's more people talking about Jesus, more things are happening, and more people doing outreach. And it actually fires up those other churches.
Okay.
And so I think that every generation needs something like that to keep people talking about Jesus, to keep people thinking about how do we actually do these things? Because things get fossilized very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And no one starts a tradition quicker than a revolutionary. Because people go, wow, that was awesome. Let's keep doing that. William Booth, who I think was one of the greatest church planters in the UK for generations, if you go to Salvation Army Church, they don't have communion. They don't have water baptism. And you go, well, why not when Jesus clearly commanded these things? Why do they not do that? Because William Booth, in his lifetime, never intended for the Salvation Army to be a replacement church.
Mm.
He wanted to get people saved, get them discipled, so he could bring them to the more traditional churches that weren't interested in those people as they first got saved because of the way they behaved, the way they acted. So he was saying, no, we don't do communion, we don't do baptism, because I'm not here to be your church. I'm here to get you into a healthy, established church. But now the Salvation Army is a church. No one's ever gone back and looked at that and said, we need to change that. There's no analysis of why that is the way it is. And I think if we've got new churches being planted, it helps everyone go, well, why are we doing what we're doing?
Okay.
And it helps everyone process that, because there needs to be, and I don't have any grace on my life at all to reform something. When I see someone someone who's born again and spirit-filled, and they become like an Anglican pastor or a Baptist pastor, and they survive and they can play that sort of political game, they survive and they thrive in that place and they can grow that church, I admire that so much. I couldn't do that. I have no grace in my life to do that. I've got friends who've done that and they've done it very well. And I think we need both.
Yeah.
I think we absolutely need both.
I think that's so true. I've got a relative actually who's recently taken over an Anglican church, not in this country, but and it's exactly that. They're spirit filled, on fire for God, believing the power of God, believing healing, signs, wonders, miracles, prophecy, all this kind of great stuff, and they are ordained, Church of England ministers, going out and looking to revive a church. And I kind of go, my mind boggles at that, but that's what they're called to do.
And here's the thing: if you've got a couple and they're living in that town, they may be living together, they might be married, they might not be married, they've got a couple of kids, and they wake up one day and they think, you know what? I want to raise these kids Christian. I want to have a Christian family. They're not going to get up and go to Tree of Life.
Yeah.
They're going to go up and call your Anglican friend,
Yeah.
and he's going to have that call. He's going to have the ability and the grace, and he's going to be in a place to minister to them. That's something really special. I admire that a lot.
No, that is really cool, and you're right. 100% agree. We need both. We need that new church movement, and we need the revival or reformation of those denominations. Because the more I hang around denominational people, I find a huge amount of hunger, but a lack of understanding, oftentimes.
Yeah,
and I don't
it's
mean that in a
Romans 10.
disparaging way, but
in Romans 10, Paul talks about the Jews, and he said they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge.
Yeah.
Some of these people, they love God more than I do.
Yeah.
Some of these people that don't know they're righteous, don't understand what we understand about faith, about grace, about the power of words, the authority of believer. Those are the people that are going out and having 72-hour praise and worship meetings.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go out and spend 3 days praising and worship. I like my sleep too much. They're absolutely on fire.
Yeah.
But these are the same people you could give an altar call on a Sunday morning, and they'll come forward and get saved.
Yeah.
They don't even know they're saved.
Yeah.
Which is why, again, part of the reason why I think we need new churches as well is because you've got the freedom to teach.
Yeah.
And
so 100 churches. I assume that's throughout the entirety of the United Kingdom.
Yes, 10 in Scotland. That's all I know at the moment.
Okay, very good, very good. And do you think So you said everyone being within an hour of Tree of Life. Pick on Scotland for an example. Is that physically possible?
I've never sat down and totally worked it out, but it does seem to be working out that way anyway.
Okay.
Without us sort of sitting down and going, right, how do we do this?
Yeah.
I'm sure at some point, somebody smarter than me, I'll have the finances and resources to pay them to work this kind of stuff out. But for example, God had told me to start in Sheffield, and we were having meetings in Sheffield, and then we were given a church in Manchester. That's the first time that's happened to us.
Yeah.
So the pastor's retired, and we adopted the church to the Tree of Life family. So that's never happened before. That's new. And then they had actually started a church in Blackpool, this church in Manchester, and it hadn't quite worked out. And I think COVID kind of got the better of it. So we're sort of, by starting in Blackpool, we're almost relaunching what they did.
Okay.
And so, but then you look at that, Blackpool to Manchester's roughly an hour, Manchester to Sheffield's roughly an hour, Nuneaton up to Manchester's just over an hour. It just where our churches are, it just seems to be moving in that direction anyway. We've never really sat down and planned it that way, but.
Praise God. Well, I think that's exciting. Obviously, you're being led by the Holy Spirit and landing where you need to land for these things.
God's been very, very good to us. That's the bottom line.
We serve a good God, don't we?
Yes.
So huge vision. How do you? To what degree do you put planning and strategy around that to make it happen?
Sure, a lot. I like planning.
Yeah,
and what I feel part of my role is, and you can use the word apostle if you're comfortable with that word, but is to take care of some of that planning so that some of our pastors can actually get on with pastoring, and feeding and growing the people. So I try and take a lot of that kind of burden off of them.
Yeah,
but so there's been an absolute almost 50-50 mix of planning and not planning. I don't know how else to express it. I'll give you an example. Yeah. We started our Dorset church and our Nuneaton church about the same time.
Okay.
So Dorset was, I got 3 emails in 1 week from Dorset, people who were watching me on TV, on Christian TV, and they said, we think we would really benefit from having a church like yours in Dorset. There's not many churches that are sort of preaching word of faith in Dorset. So I emailed all 3 of them, and I asked for permission to communicate with all of them, and they said yes. So then sent an email to all of them together, a joint email, and I said, do any of you know each other? Here's all your names, here's where you're coming from. And it turns out somebody was somebody's music teacher or something. And I said, right, I'm going to come down once, and I'll do 1 healing meeting. Let's see how it goes. And we did, and we had quite a few people turn out. I think about 20 people turned out, and we had a healing meeting. And so I just started going every month.
Okay.
And it just grew out of that. There was nothing supernatural. There was no word from God. It was just, there's a need. It wasn't like a Macedonian call. It was just an email call. And I just started going. And eventually, what happened with that was I had a couple in mind to pastor. I took them, and we were once a month. We were getting to the stage where we had about a dozen regulars.
Okay.
Which, as far as I'm concerned, if we've got 4 households coming, I can start a church.
Okay.
We've got about a dozen regulars. And I took them 1 week, and it just happened to be one of those weeks where people were away. And I think there was only 6 people turned up.
Okay.
And they were like, oh, this is too small. We can't do this. And they left. It's like, okay, Lord, I'm making a 6-hour round trip every Sunday. I'm literally finishing church in Dagenham, driving down to Dorset, doing a Sunday evening service once a month. I can't really launch it as a church yet. And then Richard Wall, again, I've mentioned him quite a bit in this podcast, but he has been my right-hand man for quite a while. He turns up and goes, Ben, I'm going to take on that church. So how are you going to take on that church? You already pastored Guilford. And he said, well, God's told me to move to Dorset. I'm going to move to Dorset with my wife. I'm going to pastor that church. What we're going to do is we're going to drive up Saturday, hang out with family, stay the night Saturday, Sunday morning preaching Guilford, drive down, do Dorset, and then we're back home. And that's their weekend now. And that church is growing, it's thriving, it's a generous church. There's pastoral issues in it, as there's in every church. So that was started on a very natural basis.
Yeah.
And there was nothing supernatural until Richard heard God to move there. I was just taking logical steps. Right, we had a meeting, it was successful. What should we do now? Have another meeting. I can't do more than once a month. I'll just keep doing once a month until someone else turns up. So that was that. Nuneaton, I'm driving to the TV studio, and God speaks to me and says, Ben, I want you to have a church in Nuneaton. I've never heard of Nuneaton, okay? Don't know Nuneaton at all. So I get to the TV studio, and I Google Nuneaton. I find out, it's in the West Midlands or wherever it is. Okay, I can get there in 2.5 hours. I can do a Saturday evening meeting there and get back in time for Sunday. Okay, this is good. So I'm recording TV programs. I just felt a nudge while I was recording the program to say, look, does anyone live in Nuneaton? So I said, look, anyone watching this program in the UK, in Nuneaton, God's told me to start a church there. Here's the number, call me. And I got 3 phone calls.
Wow.
There was a retired pastor. It was someone who'd been in Bible college, just moved back to the area, someone else who really wanted to go with God. So we just drove up to Nuneaton, met them all, and decided to have a meeting. And I had a little hall, and too small a hall, actually, because it was actually standing room only. We had over 30 people turn up and saw some great miracles. And we just launched the church Saturday nights, and I just started going there every Saturday night and preaching and pastoring. And that was very much birth from God.
Yeah.
I had no links there. I had nobody there. God started that. So it's been about 50-50, that kind of side of where we go and how we go. And we're really at the stage now where I believe that the shift is happening. Other people are coming to me now.
Okay.
And saying, Ben, I feel called to plant a church here. Okay, let's go and have a meeting then. Did you feel called to pastor it? Did you feel called to run it? Did you feel called to, take this on? And so we're starting to see quite a nice shift at the moment, that I'm not having to be the one who's starting everything myself. So we've got meetings in Enfield. I've never been to our Enfield church plant.
Oh, wow.
I've told them I'm not going till it's launched.
Wow.
So I want to get them into that habit now. I don't have to be there for everything to happen.
I mean, that's really interesting that you say that, because that was kind of going to be one of my questions for you. Was you've got all this going on. You seem to be travelling all over the UK constantly. Team is obviously essential to getting the job done and planting more churches. And how are you managing that? But it sounds like you're starting to see a shift in the way you work that alleviates you from being hands-on with everything in the way that you were.
Yes. And I've also always had a very different attitude to a lot of my sort of peers who are doing the same thing to me. And I'm not trying to criticize anyone else for what they do, but a lot of the guys I know, they're sending people out, and that's great. But I've always been happier out.
Okay.
So I'm happier preaching to 6 totally new people in some town I've never been to. I'd rather leave the church of 150 people, my associate pastor to minister, and I'd be out there.
Oh, wow.
Whereas a lot of the guys would rather send someone out. And that's nothing to do with personality or ego or anything like that for anyone, I don't think. I think it's just gift mix.
Yeah,
but I know I'm happy right there. And so
are you saying, therefore, that it's unlikely you're traveling and the amount that you're moving around is going to slow down, because that's probably where you're more gifted?
I think it's going to have to start changing.
Okay.
I'm nearly 50, and I'm not speaking negatively over my age or my future, but in the Old Testament, all the priests retired at 50.
Yeah.
And they didn't do any more. They didn't do any priesting anymore. They still hung around. They were still around for people to draw from their wisdom and whatever else. And so I'm looking at doing some slowing down. But I'm not quite sure what that'll look like.
Okay.
And I'm taking more. So, for example, I can afford, because I've got such a good team that I could literally disappear today, and Tree of Life would continue.
Yeah.
Praise God. Which is wonderful. So, because I've got such a strong team, for example, when we adopted the church in Manchester, we've never adopted a church before. I wasn't going to, but God sort of. It'd take too long to share the whole story. But I like having baby churches. I like new churches. I didn't want to adopt a teenager that's been around for a while and just looks at me funny all the time. I didn't think it was worth the hassle. But with that, I actually moved up to Manchester for 3 months.
Okay.
And I intended to move up there for 8 months. But what happened was my son came with me. He really felt called by God to pastor that church. And they just fell in love with him.
Oh, wow.
The church just fell in love with him. So for the 3 months, I was able to go back down and get involved again with other stuff. But because we've got such a good team, I'm free to do that. I could, if one of our churches was in real trouble, I could be there on Sunday.
Yeah.
And that's a really great place to be in, And
how does your original church, Dagenham, which you're still the main pastor at Dagenham, right?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Yeah. So how do they feel about the vision to go out and the fact that you're out a lot?
This is part 1 of a 2-part episode series. Make sure that you're subscribed to us on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you watch your podcasts to catch episode 2. See you then. Thank you for joining us for the Ignite the Day podcast. We hope that we've ignited your day with revelation, inspiration, and encouragement, and that we're helping you to live the life that God has called you to.